Ludwig van Beethoven.
Table of contents, Beethoven.
All about Ludwig van Beethoven, his life and his music.
Dr. Sydney Soclof. drsydney22@gmail.com. 2024.
Narration by Dr. Sydney Soclof,
Zoe Phonemes,
and Nathan Koltove. For a complete discussion of YouTube navigation, please go to tiny.1/ytnavigator. Ludwig van Beethoven, 1770 to 1827, was a German composer and pianist. He was a crucial figure in the transition between the classical and romantic eras in Western music, and remains one of the most famous and influential of all composers. His best-known compositions include 9 symphonies, 5 concertos for piano, 32 piano sonatas, and 16 string quartets. He also composed other chamber music, choral works, including the celebrated Missa Solemnis, and songs.
Some interesting facts about Beethoven. He was one of the greatest composers of classical music ever. Later, he became deaf, so he couldn't even hear his own music. When he was little, his father forced him to practice the keyboard for hours and hours. His father wanted Beethoven to be like Mozart. He demanded that people listen to his music and would stop playing if people started talking. He was often quite grumpy and scruffy.
His music was so original that he started a whole new type of music, called Romantic. The first piece of music of this new type was Symphony No. 3. It was so different from anything before that the first audience was shocked. His symphonies are so great that later composers were nervous about composing their own symphonies. His light string quartets are very deep, serious and personal. They are the last major pieces completed by Beethoven. They also started a tradition with other composers of writing their most serious music for string quartets.
Summary. During his first 22 years in Bonn, Beethoven intended to study with Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and befriended Joseph Haydn. Beethoven moved to Vienna in 1792 and began studying with Haydn, quickly gaining a reputation as a virtuoso pianist. He lived in Vienna until his death in about 1800. His hearing began to deteriorate, and by the last decade of his life, he was almost totally deaf. He gave up conducting and performing in public but continued to compose. Many of his most admired works come from this period.
Beethoven Timeline. 1770. Beethoven was born in Bonn on December 16, 1770–1783. The first music was published 1787. Traveled to Vienna and met Mozart, who agrees to teach him, but returns to Bonn on hearing that his mother is dying. 1792. Returned to Vienna and there began studying with Haydn. 1800. Beethoven's first benefit concert in Vienna. The first symphony was performed alongside the septet in one of the first 2 piano concertos. 1801. Beethoven wrote of his deafness for the first time in a letter to a friend from Bonn. He fell in love with Countess Giulietta Guicciardi and dedicated his Sonata KZ's Una Fantasia to her. This later became known as the Moonlight Sonata. 1802. Beethoven traveled to Heiligenstadt outside Vienna, hoping his hearing would improve. It doesn't, and Beethoven wrote of his despair and suicidal thoughts in letter form addressed to his brothers. This became known as the Heiligenstadt Testament. 1804, when Napoleon was proclaimed emperor, Beethoven tore up the front page of his Third Eroica Symphony, which was dedicated to him. 1805, Leonore. Beethoven's opera was completed and performed. It was considered unsuccessful and was revised twice before the final version, Fidelio, was performed in 1814. 1808, Beethoven's benefit concert at the theater in Erwin was finally held on December 22. After much delay, the fifth and sixth pastoral symphonies were performed for the first time. 1809, Austria declared war on France. 1812, Beethoven wrote a passionate letter to an unnamed woman, whom he referred to as eternally beloved.
1813, after Wellington defeated the French in Spain, Beethoven wrote a piece to mark the occasion, later known as the Battle Symphony, Opus 91. 1814, Fidelio was performed for the first time, and was then performed when the heads of state were gathered for the Congress of Vienna. 1815, Beethoven's brother Caspar died, and his wife and Beethoven were appointed joint guardians of his son Karl. Beethoven began a legal battle to win sole custody of Karl. 1816, Beethoven won sole custody of Karl. 1818, Beethoven completed the Hammerklavier Sonata and began sketches for the Ninth Symphony. His nephew Karl ran away back to his mother, and she launched an appeal for custody.
1820, Beethoven was working on the Missa Solemnis for the enthronement of Archduke Rudolf as Archbishop of Olmütz, but it was not ready for the occasion. It was completed in 1821. 1824, the Ninth Symphony and the Missa Solemnis were premiered in Vienna. 1825 to 1826, Beethoven wrote what were to be his last quartets. He originally composed the Grosse Fugue as the finale to Opus 130 but agreed to write a replacement, which was later published as a separate work. His nephew Karl attempted to commit suicide. 1827, Beethoven died in March of 1827.
1770 to 1787. Early life in Bonn. This is Bonn on the Rhine.
Beethoven was born in Bonn in 1770. His first music published in 1783 and 1787. He traveled to Vienna and met Mozart, who agreed to teach him but returned to Bonn on hearing that his mother was dying in 1792. Beethoven returned to Vienna to begin studying with Haydn. Ludwig van Beethoven was born in Bonn in 1770. Bonn was then the capital city of the Electorate of Cologne and part of the Holy Roman Empire from 1597 to 1794.
The Electorate of Cologne, in German, Kurfürstentum Köln, was an ecclesiastical principality of the Holy Roman Empire from the 10th to the early 19th century.
The Archbishop of Cologne ruled it as Prince Elector. He was called Prince Elector because he was one of the electors of the ruler of the Holy Roman Empire and also exercised secular rule of his territory.
Bonn was a town along the Rhine between Cologne and Koblenz.
After the unification of Germany in 1871, Bonn became known as a small university city, but later gained prominence after World War II as the capital of West Germany. After the German reunification in 1990, the capital was moved to Berlin, and Bonn settled down again to become a medium-sized university town.
Background: Ludwig van Beethoven had a lengthy musical background with his father, Johann, and his grandfather, Lodewijk. Ludwig was the grandson of Ludwig van Beethoven, 1712–1773, a musician from Mechelen in the southern Netherlands, now part of Belgium, who moved to Bonn at the age of 20.
The name Ludwig is related to the German Ludwig, or Ludwig, and the English would be Louis of Louis and, in French, Louis. Ludwig van Beethoven was employed as a bass singer at the court of the Elector of Cologne, eventually rising to become Kapellmeister, music director.
Ludwig had one son, Johann, 1740–1792, who worked as a tenor in the same musical establishment and gave lessons on piano and violin to supplement his income.
Johann married Maria Magdalena Keverik in 1767. She was the daughter of Johann Heinrich Keverik, who had been the head chef at the court of the Archbishopric of Trier.
Ludwig was born of the marriage of Johann and Maria van Beethoven on December 16, 1770 in Bonn. The young Ludwig displayed his musical talents early and was taught by his father, Johann van Beethoven, and Christian Gottlob Neefe.
This is young Ludwig at age 13.
Of the 7 children born to Johann and Maria van Beethoven, only the second-born Ludwig and 2 younger brothers survived infancy. Caspar Anton Karl was born 3 years after Ludwig on April 8, 1774.
2 years later, Nikolaus Johann, the youngest, was born on October 2, 1776. This is the Prince-Elector's Palace, Kurfürstliches Schloss, in Bonn, where the Beethoven family had been active as musicians for the court of the Archbishop.
Ludwig's father was a court musician, singing and playing for the nobles. Ludwig displayed his musical talents at an early age. His first music teacher was his father, Johann van Beethoven, who was often drunk and a harsh instructor. It was said that Ludwig was made to stand at the keyboard, often in tears.
Beethoven's musical talent was evident at a young age. His father, Johann, was aware of Leopold Mozart's successes in this area with Leopold's son Wolfgang and daughter Nannerl.
Johann attempted to exploit his son as a child prodigy, claiming that Beethoven was 6, although he was actually 8, on the posters for Beethoven's first public performance in Cologne on March 26, 1778. Sometime after 1779, Beethoven began his studies with his most important teacher in Bonn, Christian Gottlob Neefe, who was appointed the court's organist that year. Neefe taught Beethoven composition and, by March 1783, had helped him write his first published composition, a set of keyboard variations called 9 Variations on a March by Dressler, W0063.
Ludwig van Beethoven, 9 Variations on a March by Ernst Dressler, W0063. Select number 2 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist. A note on W00. Many of Beethoven's musical compositions are known by name and opus number. Some, however, were not originally published with an opus number or survived only as fragments. These compositions were catalogued in 1955 by the musicologists George Kinski and Hans Hom as the Werke ohne Opus, works without opus number, W00, also called the Kinski-Hom catalog. Beethoven soon began working with Christian Neefe as assistant organist, at first unpaid, 1781, and then as a paid employee, 1784, of the court chapel conducted by the Kapellmeister Andrea Lucchesi. Beethoven's first 3 piano sonatas, named Kurfürst, Elector, for their dedication to the Elector Maximilian Friedrich, 1708 to 1784, were published in 1783. Maximilian Friedrich noticed Beethoven's talent early and subsidized and encouraged the young man's musical studies. Kurfürst and Sonatas W0047 No. 1 in E B major, Ludwig van Beethoven. Select number 3 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Maximilian Frederick's successor as the Elector of Bonn was Maximilian Franz, the youngest son of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, and he brought notable changes to Bonn.
Echoing changes made in Vienna by his brother Joseph, Maximilian Franz introduced reforms based on Enlightenment philosophy, with increased support for education and the arts. These changes almost certainly influenced the teenage Beethoven. Beethoven may also have been influenced at this time by ideas prominent in Freemasonry, as Neffe and others around Beethoven were members of the local chapter of the Order of the Illuminati.
1787 Beethoven in Vienna.
In March 1787, at the young age of 16, Beethoven traveled to Vienna for the first time, apparently hoping to study with Haydn and Mozart.
A famous story asserts that, after the only meeting between the two composers, Mozart noted
that Beethoven would give the world something to talk about.
Nevertheless, the details of the relationship between Beethoven and Mozart are uncertain, including whether or not they actually met. 1787 to 1792. Beethoven back in Bonn.
After just 2 months, Beethoven learned that his mother was severely ill and returned home. His mother died shortly after that, and his father lapsed deeper into alcoholism. As a result, Beethoven became responsible for caring for his 2 younger brothers, spending the next 5 years in Bonn. His father, Johann, who at times was an abusive father to Ludwig, had become an alcoholic later in his life. At age 18, in 1789, after his mother died, Ludwig had to obtain an order by which half of his father's salary was paid directly to him for family support and to help educate his 2 younger brothers, Karl and Nikolaus. Johann died soon after in 1792. Beethoven also contributed further to the family's income by playing viola in the court orchestra. This familiarized Beethoven with a variety of operas, including 3 by Mozart that were performed at court in this period.
Beethoven was probably first introduced to Joseph Haydn in late 1790, when the latter traveled to London and stopped in Bonn around Christmas time. A year and a half later, they met in Bonn on Haydn's return trip from London to Vienna in July 1792, and arrangements were likely made for Beethoven to study with Haydn.
With the Elector's help, Ludwig left Bonn for Vienna in November 1792 amid rumors of war with France. Ludwig learned shortly after his arrival that his father had died.
Beethoven had always wanted to study with Mozart and Joseph Haydn. Haydn visited Bonn in 1790 and returned for an even longer visit 2 years later when Ludwig was 22. Haydn was impressed by Ludwig's talent and agrees to teach him if Ludwig will come to Vienna. 1792 Beethoven in Vienna.
Beethoven moved a second time to Vienna in 1792 and began studying with Haydn, quickly gaining a reputation as a virtuoso pianist. He lived in Vienna for the next 35 years until he died in 1827, never to return to Bonn. Establishing his career in Vienna. From 1790 to 1792, Beethoven composed a significant number of works. None were published at the time, and most are now listed as works without opus, that demonstrated his growing range and maturity. Mozart died in December 1791, just before Beethoven returned to Vienna. Over the next few years, Beethoven responded to the widespread feeling that he was a successor to the recently deceased Mozart, by studying that master's work and writing works with a distinctly Mozartian flavor. Beethoven had come to the attention of Count Ferdinand von Waldstein, who became a lifelong friend and financial supporter. Count Waldstein was a German nobleman and patron of the arts, and a member of the Bohemian House of Waldstein.
Count Waldstein was an early patron of Ludwig van Beethoven, and in his farewell note to Beethoven wrote, "Through uninterrupted diligence, you will receive Mozart's spirit through Haydn's hands." By 1793, Beethoven established a reputation as a piano virtuoso and improviser in the salons of the nobility, often playing the preludes and fugues of J.S. Bach's Well-Tempered Clave. Beethoven's friend, Nikolaus Simrock, had begun publishing his compositions, the first of which are believed to be 13 variations on S. Einmalein Altamon, WO 66.
Beethoven. 13 variations on S. Einmalein Ultraman, WO 66 PF. Select number 4 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Beethoven did not immediately set out to establish himself as a composer, but instead devoted himself to study and performance. Working under Haydn's direction, he sought to master counterpoint. He also studied violin under Ignaz Schuppan's and instruction by Antonio Salieri in Italian vocal composition style.
While Beethoven earned income from the publication of his works and public performances, he also depended on the generosity of patrons for income, for whom he gave private performances and copies of works they commissioned for an exclusive period before their publication. Some of his early patrons, including Prince Lobkowitz and Prince Lichnowsky, gave him annual stipends in addition to commissioning works and purchasing published works.
Perhaps Beethoven's most important aristocratic patron was Archduke Rudolf, the youngest son of Emperor Leopold II, who, in 1803 or 1804 began to study piano and composition with Beethoven. They became friends, and their meetings continued until 1824. Beethoven dedicated 14 compositions to Rudolf, including the Archduke Trio 1811 and his Great Missa Solemnis of 1823. Beethoven. Piano Trio in B-flat major. Opus 97. Archduke, Camerata Pacifica. Select number 5 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Another patron was Count, later Prince, Andreas Razumovsky, for whom the string quartets numbers 7 to 9, Opus 59, Razumovsky were named. Count Razumovsky was a Russian imperial diplomat who spent many years in Vienna.
Beethoven String Quartet Opus 59 number 1. Razumovsky. Select number 6 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist. Beethoven's first public concert in Vienna was in March 1795, where he first performed one of his piano concertos. Beethoven then published the first of his compositions, to which he assigned an opus number, the three piano trios, Opus 1. These works were dedicated to his patron, Prince Lichnowsky, and were a financial success, nearly sufficient to cover his yearly expenses. Itos Trio, Beethoven Piano Trio, Opus 1. Number 3 in C minor. Select number 7 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist. Beethoven composed his first six-string quartets, Opus 18, between 1798 and 1800, commissioned by and dedicated to Prince Lobkowitz. They were published in 1801 with the premieres of his first and second symphonies in 1800 and 1803. Beethoven became regarded as one of the most important of a generation of young composers, following Haydn and Mozart.
Beethoven also continued to write in other forms, turning out widely known piano sonatas like the Pathetique Sonata, Opus 13, which was described as surpassing any of his previous compositions in strength of character, depth of emotion, level of originality, and ingenuity of motivic and tonal manipulation. Beethoven also completed his septet, Opus 20, in 1799, which was one of his most famous works during his lifetime. For the premiere of his first symphony, Beethoven hired the Berg Theatre on April 2, 1800, and staged an extensive program of music, including works by Haydn and Mozart, as well as his septet, the First Symphony, and one of his piano concertos.
Beethoven was determined to be independent. He also expected to be treated as he felt he deserved, as an artist and creative person, not as a servant or a person of a lower class. He was quoted as saying, "What you are by accident of birth. What I am by myself. There and will be 1,000 princes. There is only one Beethoven."
Around 1796, by age 26, Beethoven began to lose his hearing. He suffered from a severe form of tinnitus, a ringing in his ears that made it hard for him to hear music, and also tried to avoid conversations.
The cause of Beethoven's deafness remains unknown. Still, it has variously been attributed to typhus, autoimmune disorders, and even his habit of immersing his head in cold water to stay awake. The explanation from Beethoven's autopsy was that he had a distended inner ear, which developed lesions over time. An extensive collection of Beethoven's hearing aids, such as a special ear horn, can be viewed at the Beethoven House Museum in Bonn. Beethoven could still hear speech and music normally until 1812. But by 1814 he was almost totally deaf. As a result of Beethoven's hearing loss, his conversation books are an unusually rich written resource. Used primarily in the last 10 years of his life, his friends wrote in these books so that he could know what they were saying, and he then responded either orally or in the book. The books contain discussions about music and other matters and give insights into Beethoven's thinking and how he intended his music to be performed. These are acoustic cornets for Beethoven made in 1813 by Johann Nepomuk Maelzel. 1800–1802. In 1800, Beethoven had his first benefit concert in Vienna. The First Symphony was performed alongside the septet in one of the first two piano concertos. In 1801, Beethoven wrote of his deafness for the first time in a letter to a friend from Bonn. He falls in love with Countess Giulietta Guicciardi and dedicates his Sonata quasi una fantasia to her. This later becomes known as the Moonlight Sonata. In 1802 Beethoven traveled to Heiligenstadt outside Vienna, hoping his hearing would improve. It doesn't, and Beethoven wrote of his despair and suicidal thoughts in letter form addressed to his brothers. This became known as the Heiligenstadt Testament. This is Vienna in 1800. In about 1800 Beethoven's hearing began to deteriorate, and by the last decade of his life, he was almost totally deaf. He gave up conducting and performing in public but continued to compose. Indeed, many of his most admired works come from this period.
This is the coal mock in Vienna in 1800.
This is Vienna in 1800.
In 1801, Beethoven fell in love with the Countess Giulietta Guicciardi and dedicated his Sonata quasi una fantasia to her, later known as the Moonlight Sonata. As early as 1801, Beethoven wrote to friends describing his hearing problems and the difficulties they caused in both professional and social settings, although it is likely some of his close friends were already aware of the problems. On his doctor's advice, Beethoven lived in the small Austrian town of Heiligenstadt, just outside Vienna, from April to October 1802 in an attempt to come to terms with his condition. There, he wrote his Heiligenstadt Testament, a letter to his brothers that records his thoughts of suicide due to his growing deafness and records his resolution to continue living for and through his art. Over time, his hearing loss became profound. At the end of the premiere of his Ninth Symphony in 1824, he had to be turned around to see the tumultuous applause of the audience, because he could hear neither it nor the orchestra.
Beethoven's hearing loss did not prevent him from composing music, but it made playing at concerts, a lucrative source of income, increasingly difficult. After a failed attempt in 1811 to perform his own Piano Concerto No. 5, The Emperor, which was premiered by his student Karl Czerny, he never performed in public again until he conducted the Ninth Symphony in 1824.
The Heiligenstadt Testament.
Beethoven writes of his despair and suicidal thoughts in letter form, addressed to his brothers. This became known as the Heiligenstadt Testament.
For my brothers Karl and Beethoven, O ye men who think or say that I am malevolent, stubborn or misanthropic, how greatly do ye wrong me! You do not know the secret causes of my seeming. From childhood my heart and mind were disposed to the gentle feelings of goodwill. I was even eager to accomplish great deeds. But reflect now that for 6 years I have been a hopeless case, aggravated by senseless physicians, cheated year after year in the hope of improvement, finally compelled to face the prospect of a lasting malady. I was compelled early to isolate myself, to live in loneliness. When I at times tried to forget all this, oh how harshly was I repulsed by the doubly sad experience of my bad hearing. And yet it was impossible for me to say to men, speak louder, shout, for I am deaf. How could I possibly admit such an infirmity in the one sense which should have been more perfect in me than in others? A sense which I once possessed in highest perfection. A perfection such as few surely in my profession enjoy or have enjoyed. My misfortune is doubly painful, because it must lead to my being misunderstood. For me there can be no recreations in society of my fellows. Refined intercourse. Mutual exchange of thought. Only just as little as the greatest needs command may I mix with society. I must live like an exile. If I approach near to people, a hot terror seizes upon me. A fear that I may be subjected to the danger of letting my condition be observed. Thus it has been during the past year which I spent in the country, commanded by my intelligent physician to spare my hearing as much as possible, in this almost meeting my natural disposition, although I sometimes ran counter to it, yielding to my inclination for society. But what a humiliation when one stood beside me and heard a flute in the distance and I heard nothing. Or someone heard the shepherds singing, and again I heard nothing. Such incidents brought me to the verge of despair. But little more and I would have put an end to my life, only art it was that withheld me. It seemed impossible to leave the world until I had produced all that I felt called upon me to produce. And so I endured this wretched existence. Forced already in my 28th year to become a philosopher. Oh, it is not easy. Less easy for the artist than for anyone else. Divine One, thou lookest into my inmost soul. Thou knowest it. Thou knowest that love of man and desire to do good live therein. You, my brothers Karl and Johann, as soon as I am dead, if Dr. Schmid is still alive, ask him in my name to describe my malady, and attach this document to the history of my illness, so that so far as possible at least the world may become reconciled with me after my death. At the same time I declare you two to be the heirs to my small fortune, if so it can be called. Divide it fairly. Bear with and help each other. What injury you have done me you know was long ago forgiven. To you, brother Karl, I give special thanks for the attachment you have displayed towards me of late. It is my wish that your lives be better and freer from care than I have had. Recommend virtue to your children. It alone can give happiness. Not money. I speak from experience. It was virtue that upheld me in misery. To it, next to my art, I owe the fact that I did not end my life with suicide. Farewell and love each other. I thank all my friends, particularly Prince Lichnowsky and Professor Schmid. With joy I hasten towards death. If it comes before I shall have had an opportunity to show all my artistic capacities, it will still come too early for me despite my hard fate, and I shall probably wish it had come later, but even then I am satisfied. Will it not free me from my state of endless suffering? Come when thou will, I shall meet thee bravely. Farewell, and do not wholly forget me when I am dead. Heiligenstadt, October 6, 1802.
Two large-scale orchestral works dominated Beethoven's compositions between 1800 and 1802. However, he continued to produce other important works, such as the Piano Sonata KZ's Unifantasia, known as the Moonlight Sonata. Beethoven, Moonlight Sonata, Piano in Orchestra. Select number 8 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
In the spring of 1801, Beethoven completed The Creatures of Prometheus, a ballet. The work received numerous performances in 1801 and 1802, and Beethoven rushed to publish a piano arrangement to capitalize on its early popularity.
Beethoven, The Creatures of Prometheus, overture conducted by Daniel Gatti. Select number 9 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
In 1802, Beethoven completed the Second Symphony, which received its premiere at the theater in der Wien, where Beethoven had been appointed composer in residence. In addition, the concert featured the First Symphony, the Third Piano Concerto, and the Oratorio Christ on the Mount of Olives. The Vienna premiere of Beethoven's Fifth Piano Concerto, The Emperor, was in February 1812.
Ludwig van Beethoven, The Emperor Concerto. Select number 10 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist. Beethoven at age 32 in 1803. Painted by Christian Hornman.
Mozart and Haydn were undeniable influences. For example, Beethoven's Quintet for Piano and Winds is said to bear a strong resemblance to Mozart's work for the same configuration, but with his distinctive touches.
However, Beethoven's melodies, musical development, modulation and texture, and characterization of emotion set him apart. By the end of 1800, Beethoven and his music were already in demand from patrons and publishers.
Class issues hampered Beethoven's love life. In late 1801, he met a young countess, Giulietta Guthd, through the Brunswick family when he gave regular piano lessons to Josephine Brunswick.
However, Beethoven could not consider marrying her due to the class difference. Beethoven later dedicated to her his Sonata No. 14, now commonly known as the Moonlight Sonata. In 1799, Beethoven taught piano to the daughters of Hungarian Countess Anna Brunswick. During this time, Beethoven fell in love with the younger daughter Josephine.
Josephine has been identified as one of the more likely candidates of his immortal beloved letter of 1812.
Shortly after these lessons, Josephine was married to Count Joseph Dame. Beethoven was a regular visitor at their house, continuing to teach Josephine and playing at parties and concerts. Her marriage was happy, despite initial financial problems, and the couple had 4 children. Beethoven's relationship with Josephine Brunswick deepened after the death in 1804 of her aristocratic first husband, the Count Joseph Dame. Beethoven wrote Josephine 15 passionate love letters from late 1804 to around 1810.
Although his feelings were reciprocated, Josephine was forced by her family to withdraw from him in 1807. She cited her duty and the fact that she would have lost the custodianship of her aristocratic children had she married a commoner.
After Josephine married Baron von Stackelberg in 1810, Beethoven may have proposed unsuccessfully to Louise Molfatti, the supposed dedicatee of Fur-Elise, but his status as a commoner may again have interfered with these plans.
Beethoven's business dealings with publishers also improved in 1802 when his brother Karl, who had previously assisted him casually, assumed a larger role in managing his affairs in addition to negotiating higher prices for recently composed works. Karl also began selling some of Beethoven's earlier unpublished works.
Karl also encouraged Beethoven, against the latter's preference, to also make arrangements and transcriptions of his more popular works for other instrument combinations. Beethoven acceded to these requests, as he could not prevent publishers from hiring others to do similar arrangements of his works.
1804 to 1810.
When Napoleon was proclaimed emperor in 1804, Beethoven tore up the front page of his third Eroica Symphony, which is dedicated to him. Leonore, Beethoven's opera, was completed and performed in 1805. It was considered unsuccessful and was revised twice before the final version, Fidelio, was performed in 1814. After much delay, Beethoven's benefit concert at the theater in Wien was finally held on December 22, 1808. The fifth and sixth pastoral symphonies were performed for the first time. Austria declared war on France in 1809.
When Napoleon was proclaimed emperor, Beethoven tears up the front page of his third symphony, the Eroica, which was dedicated to him. This is the title page of Beethoven's Symphony No. 3, the Eroica of 1804. It shows Beethoven's erasure of his dedication of the work to Napoleon Bonaparte.
Beethoven, Symphony No. 3 Eroica. Michael Boter and the Vienna Radio Symphony Orchestra. Select number 11 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Leonore, Beethoven's opera, was completed and performed in 1805. It was considered unsuccessful and was revised twice before the final version, as Fidelio was performed in 1814. Bernstein, Beethoven Leonore Overture No. 3. Select number 12 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist. Beethoven's benefit concert at the theater in Wien was held on December 22, 1808. The fifth and sixth pastoral symphonies were performed for the first time. Beethoven, Symphony No. 5. Herbert Blomstedt and the Gewandhaus Orchester Leipzig. Select number 13 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Beethoven Symphony No. 5. Fourth movement. Allegro. Select number 13 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Beethoven. 6. Pastoral Symphony. Symphony Orchestra. Arian Maciak. Select number 14 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Several Viennese noblemen had already recognized his ability and offered him financial support. Among them we Joseph Franz von Lobkowitz, Prince Karl Lichnowsky, and Baron Gottfried van Swieten.
In the autumn of 1808, after having been rejected for a position at the Royal Theatre, Beethoven received and accepted an offer from Napoleon's brother Jérôme Bonaparte, then King of Westphalia, for a well-paid position as Kapellmeister, head musician, at his court in Kassel, Germany.
To persuade him to stay in Vienna, Archduke Rudolf, Prince Ferdinand Kinsky, and Prince Joseph Lobkowitz pledged to pay Beethoven an annual pension of 4,000 florins, about $150,000 today, a year. Only Archduke Rudolf paid his share of the pension on the agreed date, and Beethoven had to rely mostly on selling composition rights and a small pension after 1815. One of Beethoven's earliest and most popular pieces was Bagatelle No. 25 in A minor, WOO 59. BII 515, commonly known as For Elise. It was not published during his lifetime, only being discovered 40 years after his death, and the actual identity of Elise is unknown. Beethoven, For Elise. Piano in Orchestra. 1811 to 1814.
In 1811, Beethoven spent the spring of 1811 in the spa town of Teplitz, and again in the summer of 1812. In 1812, Beethoven wrote a passionate letter to an unnamed woman whom he refers to as eternally beloved. After Wellington defeated the French in Spain in 1813, Beethoven wrote a piece to mark the occasion, later known as the Battle Symphony Opus 91. In 1814, Fidelio was performed for the first time and was then performed when the heads of state were gathered for the Congress of Vienna.
In the spring of 1811, Beethoven became seriously ill, suffering headaches and high fever. On his doctor's advice, he spent 6 weeks in the Bohemian spa town of Teplitz. Teplitz, or Teplitza, is a small city in what is now the Czech Republic. After Karlovy Vary, it is the second biggest spa town in the country. The following winter, which was dominated by work on the 7th Symphony, he was again ill, and his doctor ordered him to spend the summer of 1812 at the spa of Teplitz. In 1812, Beethoven wrote a passionate letter to an unnamed woman whom he referred to as immortal beloved. Beethoven was at Teplitz when he wrote a love letter to his immortal beloved. The intended recipient's identity has long been debated. Candidates include Julie Guicciardi, Therese Malfatti, Josephine Brunswick, and Antony Brentano.
In early 1813, Beethoven went through a difficult emotional period, and his compositional output dropped. His personal appearance degraded. It had generally been neat, as did his manners in public, especially when dining. Beethoven took care of his brother, who was suffering from tuberculosis, and his family, an expense that he claimed left him penniless.
Beethoven was finally motivated to begin significant composition again in June 1813, when news arrived of the defeat of one of Napoleon's armies at Vitoria, Spain, by a coalition of forces under the Duke of Wellington. This news stimulated him to write the Battle Symphony, Opus 91, also known as Wellington's Victory.
It is also known Opus 91, the Battle of Vitoria, and was dedicated to the Prince Regent, later King George IV. It received repeat performances in 1814, was a substantial moneymaker for Beethoven.
Beethoven Wellington's Victory, or Siegoter die Schlacht bei Vitoria, Opus 91. Beethoven was also one of many composers who produced music in a patriotic vein to entertain the many heads of state and diplomats who came to the Congress of Vienna that began in November 1814.
In 1814, Fidelio is performed for the first time and is then performed when the heads of state are gathered for the Congress of Vienna.
Beethoven's renewed popularity led to demands for a revival of Fidelio, which, in its third revised version, was also well received.
Beethoven, Fidelio, Overture, conducted by Leonard Bernstein. Select number 20 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
1815 to 1819. In 1815, Beethoven's brother, Caspar, died, and his wife and Beethoven were appointed joint guardians of his son Karl. Beethoven began a legal battle to win sole custody of his nephew, Karl. Beethoven won sole custody of Karl in 1816. In 1818, Beethoven completed the Hammerklavier Sonata and began sketches for the Ninth Symphony. His nephew, Karl, ran away back to his mother, and she launched an appeal for custody. This is Beethoven in 1815. At age 45. In 1816, Beethoven won sole custody of his nephew, Karl.
In 1818, Beethoven completed the Hammerklavier Sonata and began sketches for the Ninth Symphony. His nephew, Karl, ran away back to his mother, and she launched an appeal for custody.
Beethoven Sonata No. 29, Opus 106, Hammerklavier, Valentina Lisitsa. Select number 15 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
1820 to 1826. Beethoven's last years.
Beethoven in his last years. Isolated from the world by his deafness, Beethoven sits at his writing table composing the visionary last quartets. His piano lies shattered by his efforts to hear his music.
In 1820, Beethoven worked on the Missa Solemnis for the enthronement of Archduke Rudolf as Archbishop of Olmütz, but it was not ready for the occasion, and it was completed in 1821. In 1824, the Ninth Symphony and the Missa Solemnis were premiered in Vienna. During the years 1825 and 1826, Beethoven wrote what were to be his last quartets and the Grosse Fuge, Opus 133. His nephew, Karl, attempted to commit suicide.
In 1820, Beethoven was working on the Missa Solemnis for the enthronement of Archduke Rudolf as Archbishop of Olmütz. But it was not ready for the occasion. It was completed in 1821.
In 1824, the Ninth Symphony and the Missa Solemnis were premiered in Vienna.
Beethoven, Missa Solemnis. Fabio Luci. Staatskapelle Dresden. Chorus of the Sächsische Staatsoper. Select number 16 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
During the years 1825 and 1826, Beethoven wrote what were to be his last quartets in the Grosse Fuge, Opus 133.
Ludwig van Beethoven, Grosse Fuge, Opus 133. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony.
The Symphony No. 9 in D minor, Opus 125, is the final complete symphony by Ludwig van Beethoven. Composed between 1822 and 1824. The fourth movement is his only choral symphony. It was first performed in Vienna on May 7, 1824. Beethoven was almost completely deaf by the time of its composition.
Many critics and musicologists regard Beethoven's Ninth Symphony as a masterpiece of Western classical music and one of the supreme achievements in music history. It is one of the best-known works in common practice music and one of the most frequently performed symphonies in the world. The Ninth Symphony was the first example of a major composer scoring vocal parts in a symphony. The symphony's final, fourth movement features 4 vocal soloists and a chorus singing the verses of what is commonly known as the Ode to Joy. The text was adapted from the Ode die Freude or Ode to Joy, a poem written by Friedrich Schiller in 1785 and revised in 1803, with additional text written by Beethoven.
Johann Christoph Friedrich von Schiller, 1759 to 1805, was a German poet, playwright, historian, philosopher, and physician. Schiller is considered by most Germans to be Germany's most important classical playwright.
In the 20th century, An instrumental arrangement of the chorus of the Ninth Symphony was adopted by the Council of Europe, and later the European Union as the Anthem of Europe or European Anthem.
We will next have a short video clip on Ode an die Freude, Song of Joy with German lyrics and English translation.
Dein Heiligtum, deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mode streng geteilt. Alle Menschen wir den Brüder, wo dein sanfter Flügel weilt. Eines Freundes Freud zu sein, wir ein holdes Weib errungen, mische seinen Jubel ein. Ja, wer ragt nur eine Seele, seinend auf den Erden ruht, und wer's nie gekonnte Stille, weinend sich aus diesem Boot. An den Brüsten der Natur, alle Guten, alle Bösen folgen ihrer Rosenspur. Küsse gab sie uns und Reben, einen Freud geprüft im Tod. Wollust war dem Wurm gegeben, und der Cherub steht vor Gott. Stürzt nieder Millionen, ahnes du den Schöpfer Welt. Such in ihrem Sterne selbst, über Sternen aus,
These are the English lyrics to Ode to Joy. These are the German lyrics to Ode to Joy.
This is a poster of the concert program at which Beethoven's Ninth Symphony debuted on May 7, 1824, at the Karl-Marx Theater in Vienna.
Beethoven Ninth Symphony. Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Riccardo Muti. Select number 17 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Beethoven Ninth Symphony. Movement 4. Ode to Joy. Select number 18 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist. Beethoven's Ode to Joy with English subtitles HD sound.
1827 The death of Beethoven. Beethoven was bedridden for most of his remaining months in 1827, and many friends came to visit.
Beethoven died on March 26, 1827, at 56, during a thunderstorm. His friend Anselm Huttenbrenner, who was present at the time, said that there was a peal of thunder at the moment of death.
An autopsy revealed significant liver damage, which may have been due to heavy alcohol consumption. It also revealed considerable dilation of the auditory and other related nerves. This is Franz Schubert at Beethoven's deathbed. Beethoven's funeral procession took place 2 days later, on March 29, 1827, and was attended by an estimated 20,000 Viennese citizens.
Franz Schubert was one of the torchbearers at the funeral. Schubert died the following year and was buried next to Beethoven. Beethoven was buried in a dedicated grave in the Waring Cemetery, northwest of Vienna. After a requiem mass at the Church of the Holy Trinity, Dreifaltigkeitskirche, his remains were exhumed for study in 1862 and moved in 1888 to Vienna's Zentralfriedhof. There is dispute about the cause of Beethoven's death. These include alcoholic cirrhosis, syphilis, infectious hepatitis, lead poisoning, sarcoidosis and Whipple's disease have all been proposed.
This is a bust made by Hugo Hagen based on Beethoven's life mask.
The legacy of Beethoven.
Beethoven is acknowledged as one of the giants of classical music. He is occasionally called one of the three Bs, along with Bach and Brahms, who epitomize that tradition. Beethoven was also a pivotal figure in the transition from 18th-century musical classicism to 19th-century romanticism, and his influence on subsequent generations of composers was profound. The Beethoven Monument in Bonn was unveiled in August 1845, in honor of his 75th anniversary. It was the first statue of a composer created in Germany.
The Beethoven Halle is a concert hall in Bonn along the banks of the Rhine. It is the third hall in the city to bear the name of Ludwig van Beethoven.
The first Beethoven Halle was constructed in 1845 to commemorate the unveiling of the Beethoven Monument at Münsterplatz. And a second was erected in 1870 to mark the 100th birthday of Ludwig van Beethoven. This one was destroyed during World War II. The current Beethoven Halle was completed in September 1959. It has become an iconic landmark of Bonn and one of the most significant structures of the Federal Republic of Germany.
The Beethoven House, in German, Beethoven Haus, is a museum in Bonn, the place of his birth. It was founded in 1889 as a memorial site, museum, and cultural institution serving various purposes. The house dates from around 1700.
This is a German postage stamp issued on the occasion of the opening of the Beethoven Halle in Bonn in 1959. This is a postage stamp from the Soviet Union honoring Beethoven.
This is a postage stamp from Vietnam honoring Beethoven. These are postage stamps from the Czech Republic and from Hungary honoring Beethoven. This is a postage stamp from India honoring Beethoven.
These are postage stamps from Monaco and from Greece honoring Beethoven.
This is a postage stamp from Romania honoring Beethoven.
This is a postage stamp from China honoring Beethoven.
This is a postage stamp from France honoring Beethoven. There have been several motion pictures about the life of Beethoven. In 1962, Walt Disney produced a made-for-television, largely fictionalized life of Beethoven, The Magnificent Rebel, starring Karl-Heinz Böhm as Beethoven. Ungrammar de Beethoven was directed in 1937 by Abel Gance.
Eroica is a 1949 Austrian film depicting the life and works of Beethoven.
Beethoven, Days in a Life is a 1976 feature film directed by Horst Seemann and produced by the former East German DEFA studio for feature film. The film covers Beethoven's life in Vienna between 1813 and 1819.
Gary Oldman portrayed Beethoven in the 1994 film Immortal Beloved. The story follows Beethoven's secretary and first biographer, Anton Schindler, as he attempts to ascertain the true identity of the unsterblich Geliebte, Immortal Beloved, addressed in 3 letters found in the composer's private papers after his death. Beethoven was a dramatized documentary on the life and music of Ludwig van Beethoven. It was a 3-part BBC miniseries released in 2005.
Copying Beethoven was a movie released in 2006. As a fictionalized account of Beethoven's composition of his 9th Symphony.
Music is the mediator between the spiritual and the sensual life. Ludwig van Beethoven.
Music is the one incorporeal entrance into the higher world of knowledge, which comprehends mankind, but which mankind cannot comprehend. Ludwig van Beethoven.
What you are. You were by accident of birth. What I am by myself. There are and will be 1,000 princes. There is only one Beethoven. Ludwig van Beethoven.
Recommend virtue to your children. It alone, not money, can make them happy. I speak from experience. Ludwig van Beethoven.
The barriers are not erected which can say to aspiring talents in industry, thus far and no farther. Ludwig van Beethoven. Recommended videos, Beethoven. Recommended video, Ludwig van Beethoven, pianist and composer. Select number 29 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Recommended video, Ludwig van Beethoven. Short biography. Introduction to the composer. Select number 30 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Recommended video, Beethoven documentary. Select number 31 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Recommended video, Being Beethoven. BBC documentary celebrating this great genius. Select number 32 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist. Recommended video, 10 facts about Ludwig van Beethoven. Select number 33 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist. Recommended video, YouTube navigation. Recommended videos, music of Beethoven.
Recommended video, Beethoven songs playlist.
Recommended video, Ludwig van Beethoven Greatest Hits playlist.
Recommended video, 9 hours the best of Beethoven, Beethoven's greatest works. Select number 34 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Recommended video, 50 best of Beethoven. Select number 35 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist. Recommended videos. Walking tours of Bonn and Vienna. For a street-level experience of Bonn and Vienna, view the video Walking Tours. It's the next best thing to being there.
Recommended video, Best City in Germany. Bonn, Beethoven's Town in 4K. Select number 25 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Recommended video, An Ode to Joy. In Beethoven's footsteps through Vienna. Visit Austria's capital. Select number 26 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Recommended video, Vienna, Austria. City Walk. Beethoven Symphony No. 5. European Best Destinations. Select number 27 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist. Recommended video, visiting the homes of Mozart and Beethoven in Vienna. Select number 28 from the Ludwig van Beethoven playlist.
Table of contents, Beethoven.
Thanks for watching.